Hey everyone, I'm Kate Kennedy and I'm here with day 13 of 100 Days of Kane, PA. And it's Wednesday, so we have Wednesday night here at the depot where our History Society meets every single week. And we're gonna share stories of Kane's history. So last week we talked about the depot and the history of that. And then we asked you what you wanted to hear about. And we got some great requests, and we're gonna start with a request for stories about our founders, the founders of Kane, and what their early lives were like here. So Wendy Oakes has a lot of great information and is very excited to share these stories with you. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip you around, and we're gonna go over and say hello to Wendy. Hey Wendy.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's just fine.
All right, so we're so excited to hear about the early days of Kane. Our founder is pretty awesome. He's a lot of grit, and we can't wait to hear the story. So why don't you go ahead and just start from the beginning.
Okay. Most people know about Thomas Kane to a certain extent. Tom was born down in Philadelphia. He was the son of a judge, a district judge in Philadelphia. He had a law degree. He became a clerk for his father. Their office was in Independence Hall. And he was a little adventurous. He didn't want to just sit in an office all the time. So he ended up in Kane, Pennsylvania, because his father was part of in this area, and it wasn't Kane at the time, but his father was part of a group that owned all the land around here, and he came up here to survey the land. And something about Thomas Kane, he was a visionary. He decided he wanted to have a town here, and he decided he wanted to live here. And there was nothing here but trees. He was on top of a hill, of a mountain, and he could see that this would be a special place. So he spent many years, many summers up here surveying, and his wife Elizabeth would come up during the summers, and they would stay down in Wilcox at a house called the Upland House, which is still standing down in Wilcox. Over the years, he decided he wanted to build a house, and they started around the late 1800s. And he was an abolitionist, he was an activist, he was always somebody for the downtrodden. He was always looking for someone to help. He got in an argument with his father. His father thought the law was the greatest thing that there could be, and he was in a case, it was a Passmore William case, it was a famous case about slave owners. And he had to send these runaway slaves back to the South. And Thomas absolutely disagreed with that, and he quit the law practice over that. And his father was so mad at him, he called him in contempt of court and tried to put him in jail. One of the other judges made sure that he didn't go to jail, but that there was a break there for a while. And he was part of the Underground Railroad. He helped slaves escape from the South and through this area and through Philadelphia and farther north. So that right there shows you what kind of a person he was. So here in Kane, this is one of the only towns that was built because a person wanted it to be built. Not because it was at a crossroads, or it was at a river, or it was on the ocean where a deep bay came in. This was a town that one person decided he wanted to build.
And he did that even before the railroad came through, right?
Yes, before the
railroad. So there wasn't even the railroad here. It was just the woods.
He was instrumental in getting the railroad here, though. In 1864, the railroad came through. He started building his house in the late 1850s. He had some stone cut, brought up. It was laid out. The house was going to be at the tallest point, which is now where the Kane High School is. His house was situated in the spot where the auditorium is now, and it was facing the railroad. Except it would have been about 10 feet taller, because when they built the high school, they took about 10 feet of soil off to level it out. So it would actually have been a lot higher than what you see the high school at. So when this war started, he was the first person to head for Harrisburg and volunteer. The Civil War. After the Civil War started, he went and gathered up a bunch of hunters and woodsmen around here, met in Smethport, and they headed for Harrisburg. And that regiment became the famous Bucktail Regiment. And he spent several years in the Army fighting in the Civil War, and he was wounded 3 times, and he finally had to leave because of his wounds. And when they came back, to start building the house again, all the stones that they'd cut were gone for the foundation, so they had to start over again. But once they started that, they got the mill built. So he cut wood and sold the wood and used the wood to build the house. The mill was situated on the back property of where the cane handle is, towards the back, towards the woods there. That's where his mill would have been.
How did he and Elizabeth meet?
That's an interesting question. He went, and when he was 18, he went to Europe. And Elizabeth was living in England at the time. And they're actually related. They're second cousins. And he went and visited. She was just a little girl, and he brought her a doll. It was a porcelain doll, and we still have the doll in the depot. And that was the first time they met. Then when she was 9, she moved to New York City with her family. So they stayed in touch because they were family members. So he visited the family a couple different times. Well, when she was 12, she decided she wanted to marry Thomas. And she ended up getting married. And it wasn't unusual at the time that there was such an age difference, and it wasn't unusual that they were second cousins. Today it was, might be frowned upon. But she was almost 16 when they got married, and he was 30. So there was a big age difference.
So she came to Kane to
Yes.
found it with him.
She did. And during the summers when they lived in Wilcox, she was a society lady. She lived in a nice house with servants, and she came up here and there was nothing. She had a few servants that came with, but it was hard on her. She didn't understand how things worked. She did this. She was a tough lady, let me tell you, to be able to do this. So she, I think, kept Thomas in line. Honestly, he liked to flit. He wanted to go here and he wanted to go there, and she kept him focused. And she had probably, for a woman of her time, she was an unusual woman. She was in favor of women's rights. She wrote about it. She thought women should have control over their own bodies and when they should have children and how many children they should have. And that, back then, it was the men who decided how many children. She was part of the Christian Temperance Union, Women's Christian Temperance Union. She was against drinking alcohol, was in favor of prohibition. She was the president of the chapter here. So she was amazing. They had the mill here. The mill burnt down at one point, and they had to rebuild that. So they had some tough times while they were here. They kept going though, and they built the town, and everybody knows, Thomas is the founder, but a lot of people don't know that Elizabeth was behind him, pushing.
Yeah, they both sound like they just had these amazing spirits of just social justice.
Mm-hmm.
It was Kane was really founded on that kind of principle.
And the town of Kane, like different surrounding communities, actually had some segregation and things like that. That Kane never had that, and I think a lot of that comes from Thomas's influence and the Kane's influence. They had 4 children. The oldest was a daughter, and then they had 3 sons. Harriet became a doctor. Elizabeth went to school to be a doctor the year after she got married, but then she got pregnant and she quit. She never went back to school until Harriet went to school. After Harriet went to medical school, Elizabeth went with her, and they both graduated from medical school and became doctors. Elizabeth never practiced as having her own practice. Harriet did. She did women and children only, and then 2 of her sons became doctors, Thomas and Evan. They became doctors and ran the Summit Hospital here in Kane.
And what did the 4th child do?
Elisha was the first engineering graduate of Princeton, and he lived in Cushicqua. He owned a railroad out there. He built a sawmill. He had a brick company over there. So he was quite busy and successful, and all her children were quite successful. So 3 doctors out of 4 kids,
So
plus herself.
Elizabeth and Thomas.
Mm-hmm. Harriet.
He's the war hero, the founder, the innovator here. She's the doctor. And then 4 kids. 3 are doctors, and 1 is.
But he was a businessman. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you were talking about the house was being built up at the high school.
We have pictures of that.
Okay.
She was a photographer. Elizabeth was one of the first women photographers, and she took lessons from one of the famous photographers of Langenheim out of Philadelphia. And when she was here, back then when you took pictures, you put them, they were pictures on a glass negative. So you had to treat the glass with a special solution. and then put them in the camera and then expose them, and the picture would go onto the glass. It was quite a process, and we have journals that talk about how she failed this time, and this time it didn't work. And we have one glass negative that we think is really special. It's of the house up there that was built, and there's some damage in the corner, and it looks like little worms were eating it. And it's because back then the solution had albumin, which is egg whites, with other chemicals mixed in it, and that's what they used. And the reason why we think it's so special is because if you look at the corners, she held the corners. Her fingerprints are in the corners when she tilted the glass to get all the solution on.
Wow.
So that's one of our favorite negatives, because we know those are her fingerprints on there.
What happened to that house that was up on the hill?
It burned down 1896 after Thomas died. Thomas died in 1883, and there's always been a myth that he built the manor. He did not. Elizabeth built it. She designed it to her specifications. She wanted all of her children to live there with her, with all their families. It was like a multi-family home.
So the Kane Manor was built for Elizabeth, by Elizabeth,
right,
for all of her kids and their families.
Exactly, because sometimes I'll have somebody ask me about that, and they're like, General Kane's home. I'm like, no, it wasn't his.
The only home he knew was the high school home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had died long before.
Well, that is awesome. This is a great start to the history of our founders. Is there anything else that you want to add to it before we wrap up for today?
Just one little point. We're going to talk about the chapel at some point, and I just want to let everybody know that Elizabeth's daughter Harriet never married, and she actually died in the chapel. She had a heart attack during one of the services. She was leading the choir, and she collapsed and died in the chapel. So that's an interesting story for later.
That gets me interested. So we'll definitely have to pick up there sometime. All right, Wendy, thank you so much. And I've learned a lot from you tonight. So thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime.
All right, you guys, I think that's fascinating. I love that our founders were really concerned about other people and the rights of other people, that they had this grit and this determination, and I hope that makes you really proud to be living here in Kane, Pennsylvania. And next Wednesday, we'll be back with another story of our history, and would love to hear kind of what you are wanting to learn more about. I know some of you have asked for the Lobo Wolves, which we're definitely going to hit on, the Memorial Chapel, the Penn Kane Hotel. Those are some of the things that we've heard so far. But if there's other parts of our history you're curious about, we'll be here every Wednesday. So please write in the comments below what you want to be hearing about as far as the history of Kane. And this is a treasure. We're here every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. You're always welcome. It's also open on the weekend. So come down to the depot and see for yourself some of the history of Kane, Pennsylvania. All right, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.